Disclaimer: this video includes discussions of sensitive topics, including different forms of abuse. The content may be triggering and/or distressing for some to watch. The views shared by the licensed therapist guest are for informational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to my channel, Surviving and Thriving the Black Experience. I am Candace Renee, and we are here to speak our truth and to heal out loud. Today, we're going to have a conversation about what it means to live, heal, and rise in a world that often overlooks our struggles. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. Loren. Hi, Dr. Loren.
Hello.
Dr. Loren is a licensed therapist with nearly 20 years of experience in mental health. She's worked with people of all ages, led trauma-focused programs, and provided services in schools, churches, and nonprofits. Her mission is clear and powerful. Dr. Loren is simply here to help. So we know that trauma in the Black community, it's a conversation and it's about trauma and healing. And all too often we push this aside. So that's why we're here, to have a conversation that shines a light, breaks the silence, and reminds each of us how to thrive and that it's possible. So, Dr. Loren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Miss Candace Renee, for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited just about the work that you're doing through your channel. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel so special. All right. So, as we had discussed, of course, when you come on Surviving and Thriving, it's more or less just for us to go ahead and just have a conversation and just hop into it. So, let me know a little bit about what resonated with you with the channel that made you say, yes, you would go ahead and come on.
Yeah, so a number of things. I think first and foremost, I recognize because I'm really careful about what I say yes to, just trying to be purposeful, and understand the desired goal for each ask that is given to me. But I viewed your channel and I was like, you know what? She's creating a safe, non-judgmental space for
Thank you.
people to just speak their truth and people to come on and provide education to the masses. And I think that is part of my personal mission, right? To provide the education and to allow people and empower people to make the decisions that they need to make for their own lives. So I feel as though your channel really reflected that and aligned with my personal mission.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I couldn't say it any better than that in regards to why I created it. Simply put, I decided to make my channel, and I've said this, of course, on other videos too, that I decided to turn my pain into my passion.
Mm,
When you have a lot of feelings, trauma, as we'll be talking about today, you have to put it in a healthy space. For
absolutely.
one, you got to pray about it first and foremost. But you
Mm-hmm.
definitely have to sit here and allow God to sit here and speak through you when things happen versus holding it in. And so I felt that this was my way of being able to give back and to do what God wanted me to do, which is take my experiences that I've had over time, and help somebody else in a situation because it never happens in a silo.
I
So that's
love
why I
that.
decided to do
I
this.
love that. Absolutely.
So, can you tell me about what inspired you to become a therapist and specifically the work that you do in the African American community?
Great question. What inspired me to become a therapist? It's interesting because I often tell people I believe I have a gift of counsel. And so then I then just went to school to get the proper education that will support that gift. So the reason I say that I have a gift of counsel is because I can remember being a little girl and I would go with my dad they had, I don't even know if they still do this, but take your child to work day. And he
Mm-hmm.
worked downtown, and we would ride the metro train into downtown. And as we would walk to and from his place of work, sometimes we would see homeless people or, just people who clearly were unfortunate sleeping outside. And as a little girl, that would prick my heart. Like, and I don't even think I ever told my dad this, but I would go home and I would cry like real
Oh,
tears because I'm like, man, why are they living this way? How did they get this way? It was almost like even as a little girl, I understood that what I saw on the surface was
mhm.
not the how, that there had to be some deep rooted issue. And so I was always curious about the why. And then when I was little, also, people would like grown adults would just confide in me and tell me things they probably shouldn't have told a little girl. But that's why I say I have the gift of counsel. Even to this day, I could be randomly walking around the street. I could be in another country, and people
Mhm.
will just start talking to me about their lives, and then they'll say, "I didn't really mean to tell you all that," and I'll say, "It's okay. Trust me, it's okay. It's because of the gift that I have." And so it was either I was going to be a surgeon or be in the field of psychology. And so went down the path of psychology after kind of looking into being a surgeon, and just resonated me. I think overall, I just enjoy seeing people healed. So whether that is through their physical body, through their mental health, their emotional health, I just enjoy looking at, just walking alongside people on their healing journey, really.
Mhm. That's amazing. I mean, that just resonates with God will make room, your gifts will make room for you. So
Mm-hmm.
something that you've experienced since you were a child has sat here and led to you being able to be I want to say this, is it okay if I say healer? Is that okay if I say that terminology?
You know what? It is okay. Many have said it. I have not said it, but
Okay.
I at some point I have to accept it, right? So
And or
I
being a
take it as
help.
a compliment. Yeah.
Yes, and or being a help.
There we go. There we go.
Um, Let me see. So tell me about let me see. As a therapist, can you explain to me how you explain to your clients that like trauma is not a character flaw?
Yeah, I think that first and foremost, I typically will start with the, you know, just kind of naming our definition of trauma. And so I'll do it here for the purposes of this discussion. When I say trauma from a clinical lens, it's typically referring to a distressing event or experience that has the ability to have a significant impact on you mentally, emotionally, and physically. It could either be short term or it could be long term. And then we get into certain mental health diagnosis like post traumatic stress disorder, which is more long term, right? Something that kind of persists after either a distressing event, a traumatic event, or a complex trauma. Complex trauma is something that people have experienced where they've experienced multiple traumas, trauma after trauma after trauma. So um, yeah, I like to just get the definition out to make sure myself and the client or whoever I'm speaking to is on the same page as it pertains to trauma. And so once we name that definition, sometimes through defining it, people have that aha moment of, oh, no, nothing. It doesn't mean something's wrong with me. This is something that happened to me many times beyond my control. But sometimes as we continue to do the work, because depending the type of trauma, right? Some people will blame themselves. They will internalize it, just depending on the culture in which you come from, how you were taught to deal with trauma, if you were taught to deal with trauma.
Right.
And so everybody's going to be a little bit different in trying to ensure that they understand this doesn't mean this happened to you. That doesn't mean this is a character flaw because we can't control what happens to us. Now,
Right.
what is within our control is I oftentimes tell people you cannot control what happened to you, but your mental health and your healing is your responsibility once you
Absolutely.
have the tools to do so, right? So
I appreciate you saying that because I think a lot of the times people don't understand that for one, unless of course they have someone who has the knowledge like yourself, like a therapist and or someone who is in proximity to a therapist to understand that there are different types. And so
Hmm.
I think that sometimes there's a lot of assimilation with just like, I was traumatized because of something that maybe just upsets one person, but that traumatized somebody else because of background, history, amount of times that this particular event has taken place that caused psychological harm or things as such. So I really appreciate you being able to break that down for the audience, for them to be able to understand and have context to it. Um, Tell me about what are some common myths about trauma that you've heard that you've had to even challenge in your own work?
Hmm. Okay, some common myths. No, that's a good one. So I think some common myths that I typically hear is first and foremost, a lot of people don't even realize they're traumatized or that they've experienced trauma. Again, depending on the type of culture, type of family system, subculture that you kind of were raised in, sometimes things can become quite normalized, right? And so if there's a particular trauma that always happens in your community, whether it be gun violence, poverty, whatever it is, if that's all you've known, sometimes when people come and sit with me and I say, and they say, I don't know why I'm depressed or why I can't eat or why I can't sleep. And they begin to tell me their story. And I say, did you know that you've experienced a significant amount of trauma? Do you know
Hmm.
it can be traumatizing for some people to have their parents divorced, to have a family member go to jail, to have a family member die, to have a pet die, right? Like, did you know these things? And it's like they almost like for the first time in their lives they've been told like you've been traumatized, that's why you're hurting the way that you are, that's why you're in fight or flight mode all the times. You
Hmm.
come from a traumatized community and it's almost like you could see the light bulb go off, and also you see them begin to relax and rest, like wait a minute, there's a reason that I can't focus at work, there's a reason that I'm hyper aroused. There's a reason my children cannot sit still because they're hyper aroused because it comes from a trauma that we didn't even know was trauma, and I love that process.
Hmm. You actually turned on a light bulb for me too in that moment because I think about the concept of I feel that sometimes my pain is that like sometimes our people don't understand what trauma is and or I'm gonna say this metaphorically don't have the time for trauma.
Yeah.
Meaning that yes, they've gone through something, but sometimes it's so repetitive,
Mhm.
and or they're in an environment to where they can't change their environment that they grow used to it. And so
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of the times when it comes to seeking out therapy and or seeking out understanding, that capacity sometimes isn't there. For example, I let's just say metaphorically, right? Like as a person, I live in a community that has so much violence,
Mhm.
so much trauma. Maybe I'm at home, maybe I'm a single mom, I have three kids, and I need a mental break. But when does that person have that time for it?
Mhm.
And so I think that a lot of the times in my brain, I think of the concept of them understanding that therapy should not be a luxury. It should be
Mhm.
something that you do,
Mhm.
that you have to do to be able to process. Because I think people are more or less, let me say it the right way, more or less there is a person is harmed due to them not understanding the trauma that they've in fact experienced and not seeking assistance and or support and just going with that mentality of I can get through this, it'll be all right,
Mhm.
and doing
Mhm.
more harm internally than what doing more harm is pretty much what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
No, absolutely. And depending on what culture or family system you grew up in,
Hmm.
you learned that from somewhere. So if we take the African American woman, for example, we were taught to be strong, just to keep going, to
Yep.
keep pushing. And so to the point that being a strong Black woman has now, has some negative connotation around it
Hmm.
now, as more and more Black women are giving themselves permission to actually, no, I'm not okay. And actually, that did hurt. And actually, I do want to cry. And actually, I think I'm going to take a moment to rest and heal, whatever that means to me. So a lot of times the way in which we respond and or react to something comes from the manner in which we were raised, in which we taught. So if we're taught to respond or react to those things. And so if you come from a community that doesn't necessarily pause or only pauses long enough to light candles and wear the t-shirt, and then you have to get back up and go to school the next day. You have to get back up
Yep.
and feed your kids and take them to school, and nobody is mentioning that sometimes some people actually need to pause and be safe enough to do that, to cry about it, to talk about it, to scream about it, to be angry about it. And it is okay. And it is okay. So often I think that certain communities we're not given the space to feel safe enough to actually not be okay and say, I'm not okay.
I completely agree with that. I think it's really interesting because I've seen in different spaces as well that as soon as someone says, and it could be of different races, to be honest. If I happen to see a black woman saying, "I'm tired, I can't deal with this," there are so many stereotypes of why she can't deal with it, and things as such. But if someone of a different race says, "I'm tired, I can't deal," oh, how can I help you? And
Exactly.
it's like,
Yeah.
why is the response not the same? Like that person's pain is that person's pain. So I just think it's really interesting in our community that it's kind of that double standard to trauma to a certain extent.
Mhm.
But thank you for explaining that too. From your professional lens, what makes generational or historical trauma unique to our community?
So when I hear generational, I actually think of intergenerational trauma. And so when I talk about, for the purposes of this discussion, intergenerational trauma, it refers to the transmission of psychological and physiological effects of trauma from one generation to the next. So it typically occurs when individuals experience severe adversity and prolonged adversity, which then gets passed down to their children and their grandchildren. So things like epigenetics have been researched, and intergenerational trauma has been significantly researched, particularly in the African American community when you go back from slavery until now. And some of that research was prompted by, comments like, why don't they just get over it? They're not enslaved anymore. Or, why are they still having, why does so many of them have high blood pressure and all the things, right? But intergenerational trauma is real. And simply put, you've heard people say, hurt people.
Hurt people.
And that
Yep.
is an all races, right? And all,
Yes.
demographics. And so if if you were not allowed safe spaces to process and to heal, when there was a stigma placed on, us as Black folks receiving mental health help, right? So when you didn't have that avenue, some people weren't able to heal. Now, some people have different ways in which to heal. I'm not saying that everybody's healing journey has to include therapy, but there were some that just weren't healing at all because that wasn't an option. It was like you have to get up, you have to go to work, you have to feed your family, you have to just keep going. But the trauma didn't disappear. So people kept giving birth to generation after generation. And those hurt people hurt the next generation, oftentimes unconsciously, right? And
Yep.
so that's why you will hear us say, you know, um, those who love and appreciate the work of our ancestors, the work of our elders, the work of our parents, we don't blame them because they did the best they could with what
Yep.
they knew, right?
Yep.
But once you know, then it is then your responsibility to, again, your mental health is your responsibility so that you don't keep hurting the next generation and hurting the next generation. And I do see us doing a lot better at that in the African American race, and it makes me proud. It's what
Mm-hmm.
I began to advocate for over 20 years ago, breaking down that stigma of, African Americans seeking the help that they needed, and Black men seeking and being okay and being provided a safe space to fall apart, to cry, to dare to cry, right? When we live in a
Yeah.
society that says men, especially men of color, are supposed to be extremely tough, definition of tough. So, yeah.
I really appreciate you breaking it down and also bringing this specifically to the men as well too. So often, of course, on my channel, I more or less like I don't necessarily try to tailor it to women, but being a woman and having my own, experience, feelings, and things as such, a lot of the material that I go over does kind of go within, does go in the genre of women, but it's just really, really interesting when you were saying like that concept of epigenetics and that concept of, well, why, if you know better, you should do better, right?
Mhm.
Um, if we know that this is what happened before, then we don't want to repeat this, so we should do it differently, right? But I feel like to a certain extent, it's deemed as very difficult because people aren't taught how to do it.
Mhm.
So for a person who, in fact, okay, so let's talk about a diet, right? Let's do some real surface level. So chunky people, including myself. We are taught that if we eat these yummy chips, because I'm a chip fiend, you can keep the cakes and stuff. I'm
I get
chips.
it.
So, you eat the chips and stuff like that, your blood pressure go up, you get all this sodium, all this other stuff. Like I know better. I know I'm not supposed to be eating, I'm gonna say more than the 25-cent bag of chips. Oh, they 50 cent now, but more than a 50-cent bag of
Mhm.
chips.
Mhm.
The moral of what I'm trying to say is that like it's really, really interesting when it comes to in fact trauma because how do you teach? How does one person teach another not to be traumatized if themselves they haven't had to go through it and understand how to get over the hill of it? And I think a lot of the times what happens is with that generational thing of going down, that person has gone through trauma and then they haven't had it resolved or found that breakthrough to release and things of such. So now it goes right down to the next one. So I align with exactly what you said, but it's so in my brain, I can see some people in the audience probably saying, like, well, how do you do this? How do you get from here if you have no blueprint of how to
Mhm.
get away from it? Like my
Mhm.
mama sat here and worked herself all the way, did this, did what she had to do, pulled herself from this metaphorical bootstraps, right? She did this and stuff like that and made a way for us. So that's what I'm supposed to do, and I'm supposed to emulate,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
I think that what would you say to someone who thinks like that and who doesn't know how to get relief from trauma?
No, that's powerful. I think, it's less about trying to get away from it. See, and I get that thinking because it doesn't feel good to the human brain, to the human soul to feel and sit in everything that trauma brings about, whether in the moment or 20 years from that moment, right? Human beings love to be in control. We just do, whether we fit it or not. And when we are not in control, that is when we get stressed. When we are not in control, that is when fear comes up, if we are honest with ourselves. And so, we want to run away from grief and loss. We don't want to sit in certain emotions because they don't feel good to us. We'll sit in happiness, we'll sit in joy, but why don't we allow ourselves to sit in anger or sadness? And I'm not saying be consumed by it because that could absolutely lead to something else, but to simply feel those emotions just like we feel the more acceptable emotions, right? And so it's less about getting away from it and saying, accepting that this happened in our family. I, you know, Granddad molested several generations of children. This is
Mhm.
a real thing that happened, right? Um, and you can't run from it. The healing starts when you accept it. And that's usually where we start a lot of times, after we assess folks for to make sure they're appropriate for trauma work. And there's different forms of interventions and different types of trauma work, but it's the acceptance that this happened to me. It happened to me, and whatever feelings come up with it, right?
Mhm.
When you come from a culture that more so has taught you just get over it in so many ways. If you grow up in a particular religion, they too can kind of send that message of, it's going to be okay, God will heal it, or the gods will fix it, and that's okay too, right? But until you accept that this thing happened to me, and these are the emotions that I have behind this thing, and I am allowed to have these emotions behind these things, no matter if the person who did it to me understands it or not, no matter if they apologize or not, this happened to me. And this is how I feel, and my feelings are validated, right? Which they are. And so that's typically where we start. We don't try to get people to run away from it. the challenge is getting people to sit in it, because some people, if they were taught not to cry, or crying was a sign of
Hmm.
weakness, you gotta just create a safe space for them to do what their body is naturally created to do. Not
Hmm.
everybody, but many people release by crying. If you grow up in a family where they constantly tell you quit crying, or oh,
Don't
you're
wear
so
you.
weak,
Mm.
tell a little boys quit crying. Well, now you then have to retrain the brain to then allow the body to release years of pain. Uh, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Gabor Mate, and he is phenomenal in the field of research as it pertains to trauma. The body keeps the score. It's the idea that no matter how old you get chronologically,
Hmm.
if you have not dealt with the pain that comes from the trauma that you experience as a child, childhood trauma, adulthood trauma, the body's going to hold on to that. It has been said that that is what produces many sicknesses in the body, when the body is holding on to the pain and the sadness that comes from trauma that is not allowed to be processed in a safe space. There are so many people who are living in fight or flight mode as a result of trauma experience in childhood, which is why you get people on their deathbeds who still feel very hurt by something that happened to them when they were 10 years old. It's
Hmm.
not going to go away. It doesn't just disappear. You get older, you can't drug it away. You can't sex it away. You can't religion it away. You have to come face to face with that pain, and you have to accept that it hurt.
I appreciate. I think you just metaphorically freed somebody. I'm just saying in general because that's very powerful of what you said because even what you said before in regards to it is not your fault, and I'm gonna make sure that when I actually of course, have this video come up and stuff. I want to put that actually in text form for people to see that because some people are visual. It is not your fault
Absolutely.
in regards to if you, in fact, experience a trauma, but it is, in
Mm-hmm.
fact, your responsibility to make sure and to learn how to move from it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
definitely going to make sure I have that as well, too, because that is so powerful. With that being said, do you feel that therapy is for everybody?
You know, people ask me that all the time, and my answer has always been no. I mean, different people need different things to heal based on whatever their definition of healing is. So even as a clinician, we don't provide the definition of healing. I ask, what is your definition of healing? So people, when people say, I just want to heal, well, first I want to understand what healing looks like for you so that I can support your definition. It's not about what I think healing is. And people find healing through different means. There are people who can read self-help books and healing will come from that. There are people who can talk to a priest, a rabbi, a pastor, and healing will come from that. There are those who will engage in therapy for 6 months. Healing will come from that. And then there are those who therapy is a lifelong journey for them. They'll tell you proudly they've been in therapy 10, 15 years.
Mhm.
It's not linear. Healing is not linear. And so everyone, I believe in providing different tools, right? Laying out the different tools and options and allowing people to choose. And it may be a number of things that they kind of put together to ensure that they are healed based on the definition, which may include therapy, support groups, whatever. It may include therapy for a season, and then they find themselves in another season going back into therapy, right?
Mhm.
So I don't necessarily think it's. I think it could be beneficial depending on the beliefs behind therapy as well as the client's willingness to do the work. So oftentimes people will see therapy as a place where you just come and talk, 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 talk.
And
And
just dump.
therapy is a thing. It's a thing. But therapy is, you get out of therapy what you put into it. So your therapist should never work harder than you, but what we do is come alongside you, right? And so, I've encountered people that are like, no, I'm ready. It's time. I can't. I'm like a volcano. I'm just crying randomly at red lights. I'm crying at commercials. I need to process this in a safe, confidential space, non-judgmental space.
Mhm.
Um, and I need someone to help me who has this experience. And those folks will come ready because they're like a volcano. Again, the body keeps the score. So you can only hold that pain and that trauma for so long. At some point, it's like a volcano. Either you find yourself erupting in anger and projecting that onto your partner, onto your children, in the workplace, or you're just crying what seems to be random. That is the body saying it is time. You will deal with this, and you will deal with this now, right? And I think that's the beautiful way in which God created our bodies, right? To let us know. Because the more you harbor that, there are those who say, and I haven't done my research, that, certain forms of cancer, the body is holding all that negativity. So it's not far fetched to me. I mean, the body is not created to hold that like
Well, I appreciate that. We are diving right in with this. Like we are freeing and supporting people. And I guarantee I need everybody. I should have told them at the beginning of this. Make sure you got your pen and your piece
that.
of paper because you're gonna need to take notes. But I'm about to say I might even have a pop quiz at the end of this.
Uh-oh, not a pop quiz. Don't do it to them.
But we have in fact run into our time. So I would like to know, are you okay with us extending this conversation?
Yes, let's go for it.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so this is Dr. Lauren, and from Surviving and Thriving the Black Experience, we will go ahead and do a part two. So everybody, stay tuned. All right, bye everyone.